So my official welcome to you all. My name is Larissa Lamb. I am with New Day Films. I am the marketing lead of the steering committee. I directed a film called Far East, Deep South about early Chinese in Mississippi in the segregated South. We are doing a wonderful discussion today with our Reframe and Refresh series, examining films on resistance movements. Today's panel is hosted by New Day, and to share more all about New Day is one of our very own filmmakers, Kate Way.
So New Day Films is a unique filmmaker-run distribution cooperative, providing award-winning films to educators, community groups, government agencies, public libraries, and businesses since 1971. Democratically run by more than 150 members, New Day is committed to reflecting greater diversity, representation, and inclusion. New Day films have been broadcast on PBS, HBO, and other major media outlets. We're celebrating over 50 years of delivering dynamic and provocative storytelling with filmmakers who have won hundreds of awards, including Emmys and Oscars. And today we're so happy to be able to bring you programming on two of our most recent titles. Thanks so much.
We are ready to introduce our moderator for today. I am delighted to introduce Pam Sporn, who is a Bronx-based documentary filmmaker, educator, and activist. She loves listening to people tell stories about standing up to injustice in their own unique, subtle, and not so subtle ways. A pioneer in bringing social issue documentary making into New York City high schools in the 1980s and 1990s, Pam substantively contributed to the growth of the youth media movement, in addition to Detroit 48202 Conversations Along a Postal Route. Pam's work includes the documentaries With the Stroke of the Chaveta, which is also distributed by New Day Films, and Disobeying Orders, GI Resistance to the Vietnam War. Please welcome Pam Sporn.
Thank you so much, Larissa. And I'm happy to introduce our panelists to all of you, so you can really know how the breadth of their experience and work. So Kelly Anderson co-directed Rabble Rousers, Francis Goldin, and the Fight for Cooper Square, alongside Ryan Joseph and Catherine Barnier. Her other recent films are Unstuck, an OCD kids movie, and My Brooklyn, a documentary about gentrification and the redevelopment of downtown Brooklyn. Kelly's previous documentary works have won numerous awards, including nomination for a National Emmy for directing, and have been screened at prestigious festivals, including Sundance Film Festival, and have been broadcast on HBO. She's the author of Documentary Voice and Vision, a creative approach to nonfiction media production, which I have used with my students at Hunter College and Brooklyn College, and a recipient of the George C. Stoney Award for Outstanding Documentary from the University Film and Video Association. Kelly is a professor of media studies at Hunter College in New York City. Lisa Molomot co-directed the new documentary Safe Haven, alongside Allison Moons. Molomot is an award-winning filmmaker who produces and directs social justice documentaries across North America. Many of her recent works, Missing in Brooks County, The Cleaners, and Soledad, have focused on immigration and immigrant communities. Lisa is currently working on a documentary about an archaeology project in Tucson, where she has been living for the past 8 years. A graduate of the American Film Institute, Lisa Molomot is an American documentary filmmaker and editor whose work has aired on the PBS series Independent Lens and America Reframed, and has been seen at film festivals all over the world, including Sundance and South by Southwest. Also joining us is Betty Yu, a multimedia artist, photographer, filmmaker, and activist born and raised in New York City to Chinese immigrant parents. Ms. Yu integrates documentary film, new media platforms, installation, photography, and community-infused approaches into her practice. She is also a co-founder of Chinatown Art Brigade, a cultural collective using art to advance anti-gentrification organizing. Ms. Yu won the Aronson Journalism her Social Justice Award for her film Three Tours about U.S. veterans returning home from war in Iraq and their journey to overcome PTSD. Her documentary Resilience, about her garment worker mother fighting sweatshop conditions, screened at national and international film festivals. Used multimedia installation, The Garment Worker was featured at Tribeca Film Institute's Interactive. Miss Yu teaches video, new media, social practice, art, and activism at Pratt Institute and Hunter College, and has over 20 years of community, media justice, and labor organizing experience. Wow, what a panel. So first, we'd like to show the trailer to Rabble Rousers. In the film, a trailblazing housing organizer and her diverse working class neighbors fight Robert Moses, the real estate industry, and 5 mayors to create the first community land trust in New York City, an oasis of permanent low-income housing in the heart of the rapidly gentrifying Lower East Side. Here's Rabble Rousers.
When you're dealing with a roof over a family's head, either you fight for your apartment or you're out of here. From the very beginning, they learned that if they weren't going to be part of it, it wasn't going to work. When I came to Lower East Side, it was amazing.
People always helped each other, even though they didn't speak the same language.
Cooper Square was the pioneer. This is the place where the tenant movement was born.
When Robert Moses came to the Lower East Side, we were ready. We were really ready for him. Boy, did he pick the wrong neighborhood.
Today, our greatest single problem is tenant removal.
Robert Moses was a master builder and planner. He was like God.
A political fixer, maker, dealer, wizard. You couldn't cross Moses.
We must have a lower Manhattan expressway now.
Robert Moses decided to take over my area of the Lower East Side.
You have to move a lot of people out of the way. A lot of them are not going to like it.
Cooper Square's struggle was unique because they took the initiative to develop their own ideas about what they wanted to see in those 12 blocks.
We said we want urban renewal, but we wanted to benefit the people in the neighborhood, not victimize them. This was a tiny organization. We felt if we could get rid of that son of a bitch, we could do anything.
A group of people from the Lower East Side, small community, took on Goliath.
The economic forces are so powerful. This was class struggle at its worst.
People became conscious of the fact that it's all about gaining control over the land.
The Cooper Square Community Land Trust, that was bananas.
Nothing like this has happened in the state of New York, ever.
This block is not for sale.
We fought the bureaucracy of the city. We fought the big corporations. It took us 50 fucking years to win.
You know why we're gonna win this fight? Because we don't give up.
Saying how powerful is that? I had the opportunity to actually meet and interview Frances Goldin, and she was amazing. So this film is such a tribute. So Kelly, I have a question. Rabble Rousers is this amazing chronicle of a struggle that took years to win, 50 years. And I was so struck by the comment of one of the organizers, Tito Delgado, where he said, I went in wanting heat and hot water and came out with a world view. And that's such a Paulo Freirean educational concept. So I'm wondering, how can educators and organizers use this idea as a teachable moment?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I love that quote as well. I think it actually mirrors the experience that we want students to have in the classroom. You know, they encounter evidence in the world. In this case, Tito had no hot water. But then the next phase is to ask why. How did this happen? And so I think what's powerful about this film and why I feel so privileged to have been able to work on it is that it documents 5 decades of urban policy through the story of Cooper Square. So everything from urban renewal and how that reshaped the city, and then disinvestment in the 70s, and then reinvestment, especially speculative reinvestment in the 80s. gentrification. And so there's this sort of long history leading up to that, to the current moment that Tito finds himself in. And I think that if we can get students to understand the ways that the urban environment is shaped, has been shaped over time by policies, many of which are racist and anti-poor, I think it can be really powerful for people to understand their place in the world, and then to be able to move forward to also change their environment. So, you know, in the 50-year struggle of Cooper Square, it's not just all these forces bearing down on the community, it's also a community that really took it into their own hands to devise strategies that had to shift over all those 50 years to meet those different challenges. And in the end, they achieved something extraordinary. So, you know, one of the reasons we thought it was important to make the film is that it's a success story. And having worked in the, you know, urban studies area for a while, people always ask, well, where's a successful story? You know, who's done it right? And we always point to Cooper Square and say, well, here's a community that did it right. They shaped the future of their own neighborhood against incredible odds. So yeah, I think it is an invitation to get people to dig deeper into why things are the way they are.
Yeah, and I think the animations and the charts and the really explain some complicated economic and urban policies that are really great for young people and college students. So I really encourage our listeners to use this wonderful film. Something else I really appreciate about Rabble Rousers is the film's recognition of Fran Goldin's openness about being a member of the Communist Party, especially in this time period. It's something that you might have chosen to downplay because everyone knows this medium is mediated and we can edit it the way we choose. But Francis Goldin was firm about that, and you highlighted that with honor in the film. So I'd like to know why did you elevate that point, and how might teachers and organizers dig deeper into kind of the role of communists in the social justice movements?
Well, if I suspect some people on this Zoom know Fran, and there was really no way of not including it. It was so core to who she was. But one of my favorite things about the way we talk about that in the film is that Tom Angotti, who's one of the people we interview in the film, talks about how, and this is over footage of communists marching in May Day parades in New York City. And he says, you know, the Communist Party was a fact of life in New York City in the 30s and 40s. And people debated it. People had, you know, talked about its relationship to the Soviet Union. Fran talks about how she left the Communist Party and joined the American Labor Party, but that it was just part of the fabric of society. You know, it wasn't until the 50s something that people were really afraid of affiliating themselves with. So I think that history is really important for students to know about, especially today. I mean, you know, we have a resurgent democratic socialist movement, you know, in Bernie Sanders and AOC and other people. I think it's really important for people to know why people are coming up with the policy solutions that they are to the problems that we've been facing forever, or for decades and decades. So to me, I like the idea of just normalizing political affiliation on the left and opening that up for students. And it also then, you know, can get them talking about, you know, there's stuff in the film about Fran's FBI file, which she pulls out. Her husband was blacklisted. You know, a lot of students now might not even know about the House Un-American Activities Committee and why we don't talk about communists and socialists now. So, you know, even W.E.B. Du Bois is in the film running on a ticket with Fran for the American Labor Party for the state Senate. And I know a lot of people know Du Bois as a Black writer and activist and thinker, but I don't know if, you know, people always associate him with being a socialist. So yeah, I think there's, you know, lots of opportunities to open up conversations that are really important today.
Yeah, so important, so important. Thank you so much. Now we'd like to share the trailer to Lisa's Safe Haven. Safe Haven weaves together powerful stories of US war resistors who sought refuge in Canada during wars in Vietnam and Iraq. The film shows how Vietnam-era resistors participated in a movement to support the younger generation of US soldiers. Safe Haven exposes realities and myths of Canada as refuge. Here's Safe Haven.
Military recruiters are smart people.
Recruiter basically lied to me, saying that, you know, the jobs that I get would be doing helicopters.
From the time I sort of had my aha moment to me actually getting on a Greyhound and leaving was about 14 hours. Even having been in a combat zone, that's the only time in my life I've been truly terrified.
I had never been to Canada before. I'd never left the country. I had gone to California and to Nevada.
I had never actually been to Canada before. I didn't know much about it.
I didn't know very much about Canada at all. All I knew is that it was north of the United States.
So moving. Lisa, this film is really resonant with me. I did one of the earliest films I did was about Vietnam veterans who came back from the war and were part of the anti-war movement, and it just really it really is so powerful. I'd like to know, what one thing that stands out to me in Safe Haven is the intergenerational nature of the war resisters support movement in Canada. So what lessons does that hold for educators and organizers, do you think?
Yeah. So yeah, again, the film is about Vietnam era war resistors, but also about Iraq era war resistors. And they had a very different experience. So during Vietnam, the draft dodgers and the war resistors, so the people that actually went to Vietnam but decided to leave and go to Canada, over 100,000 people went to Canada during that time, and most of them were allowed to stay. And a lot of them stayed in Canada. They continued their lives in Canada and contributed to Canadian society and are very grateful to Canada for the opportunity and for Safe Haven there. The Iraq era war resistors had a very different experience. They were not welcome the way the Vietnam era resistors were. And part of that was obviously the government was a different government. It was a conservative government under Stephen Harper, who was the prime minister at the time, who was the prime minister before Justin Trudeau. And so it was definitely a very different time. It was a battle for the few people, that actually went up to Canada seeking refuge. So a campaign started in 2004 called the War Resisters Support Campaign. And the people that started that campaign looked around, to see who could be involved in this. And obviously young people who are usually involved in activism. But they thought, why not the Vietnam era war resistors? And those are the people who then really supported the campaign, and the people, the resistors coming up who were, resisting the Iraq war. And so it was really an intergenerational fight for these Iraq war resistors. And I have to say that this film came out of the oral histories that my partner on the film, the producer of the film, Allison Mounts, who's an academic in Ontario, this came out of her work doing oral histories and seeing the similarities and the differences between the two cohorts. And so she's a longtime friend of mine, and we decided to partner up and make this film. And I learned a lot as an American, and I actually spent quite a bit of time in Canada while working on the film. I edited the film in Canada. I felt because we were dealing with two different audiences, I needed to know something about the Canadian audience, and I needed to live there for a little bit to really understand it better. And it was a really wonderful experience meeting all of these people who were part of the campaign, but also the people who were very brave in telling their personal stories of war resistance.
Pam, you're muted.
I was saying how powerful it is for students to do oral histories with people in their community. And I could see this as a real jumping off point for amplifying the intergenerational and the binational relationships in this film. It could really offer a lot of interesting opportunities for teachers to engage with their students. Yeah, so, you know, we're now in another period of war, and a war where the US is funding one side. So I'm wondering, like, what challenges and opportunities might face an educator showing an anti-war film at this moment?
Yeah, you know, I think it's an opportune time to show this film about war and the cost of war. When you think of the war in Ukraine, you know, you think about those who are forced to fight in a war, and, you know, what happens to those who resist despite immense personal cost. And also there are conversations around people who are living in conflict zones, their physical, mental health, people who are obviously fighting in the war, their health, but also displacement. You know, 7 million people have left Ukraine. So there is a conversation around that, you know, where do they go to find safe haven? And also the Russian people, the Russian people who are fighting, who are fleeing, and you know, do they also deserve to have safe haven, just like the Ukrainians do? So there are a lot of conversations around war that are, I mean, history repeats itself, so we know that. And so these are, my film is about 2 periods in the past, but I think there's so much to take from those experiences and to learn from them and to talk about what's going on right now in the present. It's delicate. It's definitely a delicate topic, and you have to, you know, be aware of that. But at the same time, I think there's so much overlap.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what makes documentary film such a wonderful educational tool, because we documentary filmmakers are willing to dive into those delicate and controversial topics and get voices of various perspectives and the ones who don't get to be heard. So I really appreciate that. I have some questions for all of our panelists. I'd like to welcome on Betty Yu. And Betty, your work is so rooted in community, and it's intergenerational as well, about resistance to war, gentrification, and labor exploitation. I'm wondering, is there a particular kind of participatory approach that you use in making media that facilitates movement building?
Yeah, thank you again for inviting me. I'm very honored to be amongst such highly esteemed filmmakers. It's great to be here. Yeah, I think there'll be some links shared if folks are interested in learning more about my work. So I'm maybe the oddball here in that I started out in documentary and now sort of doing more sort of short form multimedia and using new media platforms in my work, but always centering sort of a video, highlighting video stories, people's stories, putting a human face on the issue. But I do want to highlight, and folks probably know about it here in this community here at New Day, the document that was put out maybe like a year or 2 ago, the Documentary Accountability Working Group that put out an Ethics and Accountability for Filmmakers document, which is a free PDF that I can in a moment probably search and find and put it in here if folks don't know about it. But I think that even though that document speaks directly to documentary filmmaking, I think there are really universal principles around co-creation, co-authorship, or aspirations toward that, right? And what does accountability look like? And what does ethical filmmaking or multimedia making look like with communities who are often, as we have talked about, underrepresented, unrepresented, and marginalized, and folks who don't have access to the means of production, cultural media production tools. Although we think, oh, everyone has these tools, access to these tools now with the internet, it's still inaccessible for many, many people, which is why I've actually sort of moved into more mobile media and kind of other forms of making media. And so Chinatown Art Brigade, that's our sort of fundamental core belief, is to demystify the cultural production process. So our work with CAV, Organizing Asian Communities, they have a cultural element to their work that we've really contributed to with Chinatown Art Brigade. So we really work very, very closely with CAB, and they have a Chinatown Tenants Union that started after 9/11. So after 9/11, I think folks know the deal. Chinatown and Lower East Side was really faced massive displacement, the longtime residents, and it was a land grab for developers. And if folks want to learn more about, about the issue, I know Tom Ngadi has written a lot about it. Sam Stein, who folks might know, who's a scholar, wrote a book, Capital City, that talks a lot about Chinatown, Lower Manhattan. Anyway, I digress. But anyway, so tenants who are sort of speaking up now and really, speaking out against landlord harassment and illegal evictions and all of this since 9/11 through the Chinatown Tenants Union, wanted more of a creative outlet to actually tell their stories. And so when we came into the mix, we started with workshops, and we really just started. It was story circles. It was placekeeping walks where we would stop at places that are no longer there because of gentrification, or places of resistance that are still there despite all the changes happening. And what we were finding was we were mapping out a lot of the same sites, and sites where people were holding rent strikes and things like that, where people were winning victories. And a lot of folks actually, I want to connect back to Kelly's film, which is a lot of folks didn't know about the first CLT, the first community land trust, right in the heart of Lower Manhattan, the only one in New York City. So I think that was a way for folks to learn about CLTs in a way that was actually tangible and possible. And they are actually, CAV and Chinatown Tenants Union are part of these larger working groups talking about the possibility of CLTs in the city. And so anyway, all that to say that there's that piece of like the sharing, inviting people, guest speakers to come and talk with the tenants. And then the last piece was we actually co-created short videos and animations, telling people stories, telling their own stories, know your rights videos. And this was all kind of scripted together. And then we projected them on walls at night in Chinatown as a medium to reach other tenants in their own language who are working 14 hours a day. So they come out of the subway and you see these projections. And it was very clear that it was an outreach tool to target other tenants to get involved, but also gentrifiers and other people that there are people who are fighting and not going to just let Chinatown go down without a fight kind of thing. So I think all that to say that film and media production and cultural production is so powerful when it's done together in this kind of way that going back to that document, I'll find it, the documentary accountability working group document is, I feel like it's a universal document that any artist who's working in communities, working for social change should read. So anyway, that would be my my answer. Yeah, I'll look for the document.
I think someone already posted it.
Oh, perfect. Cool.
So yeah, thank you for that. And I mean, I love what you're saying, and the idea of like placemaking and walking tours with young people that actually can an educator can use a piece of media, whether it's a long form documentary or short pieces like what you're doing. They're great tools to jump off and then have the students use that as a model to engage with community and with history through oral history. And I think it's just so rich. So speaking of rich, all of your work, all three of you, your work is so uses such beautiful archival imagery and music to tell the stories. And how can educators use these elements as points for deeper historical inquiry with their students or with community members who don't know about past struggles?
Do you mean how can they use archives more generally, or how can they use the films? Archives?
Well, the archival material in your films. Because I mean, they last maybe 4 seconds on the screen, but how can educators amplify and dig deeper and really get into the, get all the juice out of those images?
Well, I'd like to do a shout out to the Tamament archive at NYU, which has many archives of social movements. And we got a lot of the archival material that's in Rabble Rousers from there, including all the files of the Cooper Square Committee over time and other tenants movements, Met Council on Housing and others. So that's an amazing resource right there. Yeah, I mean, we had over 400 pieces of archival footage and film. So, but a lot of stuff is, like the Cooper Square alternate plans are really interesting. So people can go through those and see how they evolved over time. There's just enormous opportunities for research projects.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I was going to chime in, but I'll wait for Lisa.
Archives.
Yeah, no, I mean, the archives in my film came from the participants. So not much to say there, but, they were much more personal stories than historical. But I do think the films themselves, both Kelly's film and Betty's work and my work, are reminders of the past and are really good evidence for the next fight. And I've seen that before with other films I've made, where my film is used in a meeting about something very similar that's happening present day. So it's really, the films themselves are archives.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to, if in one of the links that was provided, one of the projects I'm working on, and also related to Chinatown Art Brigade, is looking at the history of anti-Asian violence. That really, its roots are back in state-sanctioned violence against Chinese. And so you look at the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which I'm sure here we all know that was the only legislation to this day that bars one ethnic group from one nation from coming to this country. And it actually kicked off the creation of like what we have now, ICE, right? This idea of like borders. And just to say that there's like it's rooted in white supremacy and xenophobia. And I think a lot of what I was doing over the period of the pandemic was looking at my own family archives and really realizing I had many generations of my family in the US going back to the 1870s, a great-grandfather, but because of the Exclusion Act that existed for 65 years, they couldn't really build roots here. So they would often work and then go back and come and work and go back. And so this kind of back and forth, but all that to say that family archive, my own family archives that I share very openly in my work right now in some of my work it's relatable, right? All of us can relate, even if you're not Chinese American. But also I think that we have like a very, Americans have a very short-term memory. And so we don't understand the trajectory of things like movements, like for instance, what Cooper Square Committee did 50, 60 years ago, the wheel doesn't need to be reinvented. I mean, of course, real estate speculation and the state has new tools to dispossess us from our land and evict us and all this stuff. But just to say that we need to like learn from our own struggles and movements and social movements and not to reinvent the wheel. And I think that the archives are I love archives. I mean, I could literally look at that, the public library, the New York Public Library has that digital archive now. I could look at it for like literally hours and hours and hours. But just to say that we can learn so much from the archival footage and images and more pertinent to our movement building work and to learn from our own history and understand that things reinvent them, not to reinvent the wheel, but they recycle, these issues. And particularly, I know Kelly's film, I just the amount of archival footage just is so beautiful, looking at New York and all the time periods, like from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So yeah.
Well, I'm very partial to archives as well. And I always stress with my students that when they're making their pieces, that to really consider their family as archives, and that archives are not just in a building with and that it's a way of really honoring the histories of working class people who don't get a chance to have the light shined on their stories. So it's really wonderful. As a matter of fact, someone just posted a question. How would you recommend archivists promote their archival materials to filmmakers?
That's super interesting, because I feel like we're always like looking and trying to get the librarians to, trying to find out who has what. I mean, if the materials are available and able to be licensed, somewhat inexpensively or in the public domain, then there's definitely listservs that I think would be great for that. There's one called Visible Evidence that has a lot of documentary filmmakers on it. New Day has a listserv, and we'd be happy to share it. Yeah, it's great to know. And, a lot of times everybody's going to the same place. Like everyone's going to archive.org, for example, which is an amazing resource, but you start to see the same clips showing up in in all these different films. So if there's like a collection that's less well known, it would be great to know about it and to share with our students as well.
Yeah. I think one thing archivists could do is have screenings of films that have used the archives, the materials from their archives. Yeah.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. So one last question. What kind of educational materials do you have for your films, or are you developing to supplement the work, to supplement the films that educators and organizers might use?
I don't have one yet. We don't have one yet. This film was a big labor of love by a whole group of people over maybe 15 years almost. So we're just trying to get it out. We do have screenings coming up. I noticed someone put it in the chat at DCTV's Firehouse Cinema at the end of March. It's short, well, it's a mini run, like about a week. But I'd love to make a study guide. We're not there yet. We're just launching the film.
Yeah, there might be people on the call who have ideas and would like to contribute. If there are educators out there who have ideas of how Rabble Rousers or Safe Haven and Betty's work could be made really accessible to students, feel free to offer up your expertise.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just to piggyback off of, well, Kelly, you have a great guide that you did for My Brooklyn, which I don't know if it's still, I know
it's on the New Day site.
Oh, it is. Oh,
yes. If you go to My Brooklyn film page on New Day Films, you can download the study guide, and thank you for the shout out for that. We worked really hard on it. It's very
I know. Yeah. I've used parts of it for like organizing spaces and like formal teaching, but like different spaces. It's very accessible. The glossary is great. Yeah, folks should check it out. I feel like it's a very nice like template for how guides should be organized, laid out. But I was just going to say really quickly that I feel like in terms of educational materials now in this new digital age, they really take different forms. So a lot of what I've noticed that I've been doing with Chinatown Art Brigade is if you plug to, I think it's in the chat, there's a show right now happening at Pace University Art Gallery, which is on the ground floor by City Hall. And a lot of professors have been bringing their classes for field trips to the exhibit. It's a whole basically educational archival exhibit of the history of our work with CAB and the anti-gentrification work. But also a big part of it is our AR project, where we are honoring sites of resilience and resistance and people's stories using the augmented reality app, like a mobile phone. And so I think that's kind of the way that we've been or I've been trying to incorporate some of the educational pieces is just through QR codes, interesting ways, or everyone's got a smartphone now, and interesting ways to make the material accessible without creating a high barrier to entry, and making it accessible language wise too. So the exhibit is also in Chinese and English so that people can bring community members as well. So I think accessibility and educational materials, kind of beyond just the print, I think is also kind of important, and how you bring it to classrooms. I know K through 12 teachers in the past who've invited me to come and talk about the work. They're more and more using mobile media tools and videos, of course, in their work. So kind of a sign of the changing times. Of course, surveillance is a real thing, and all that tracking stuff is scary when you talk about, you know, people under 18. So I'm always wary of that stuff, and teaching folks tools that, you know, they can be tracked and all that. So that's something to be wary of, but it's these are amazing tools that are so easy to learn now and teach, you know, so.
That's wonderful. Such wonderful work. Thank you so much, all, Kelly, Lisa, and Betty. And I hope everybody goes onto the New Day website and sees how they can access these great films for their classrooms and organizations. I'd like to turn it back to Larissa now, before we come back and have some more Q&A from the participants.
Yeah, well, thank you, Pam, for helping guide that conversation. And definitely, we're going to be back with I know there was a couple of other questions in the chat that we'll try to get to. But before we did that, I wanted to tell you about a few things that we have coming up with New Day that would be of interest. First, wanted to let you know, if you're not familiar with New Day Films, we offer a variety of ways to stream our diverse collection of films, including ones that deal with human rights. We have peace conflict films. We have a lot of history films, and a lot of other different subject matters, including, you know, Asian American studies, etc. Please visit our website, newday.com, and you can see the different categories of diverse films. The other thing is, if you're not following us on social media already, we would love for you to follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. You can check out our handles right there. We'll also drop them in the chat. And the films today, if you are interested in learning more or even sharing the trailers, Rabble Rousers and Safe Haven are available on our New Day website at newday.com. They are, we also have Rabble Rousers available on Canopy, and I know Safe Haven will be coming to Canopy shortly. But if you have access to Canopy, feel free to check them out there. If you are a filmmaker, and I noticed in the chat we have several here with us today, if you're interested in possibly joining or submitting a film for education distribution through New Day Films, we are a unique co-op. You can go to our website to learn more, but the most important thing is please attend one of our new filmmakers webinar. Our next one is April 5th, Wednesday at 11 Eastern. And certainly feel free to reach out through the website with any questions you have. And I'll drop the link to sign up for that in the chat as well. In the meantime, I know we've got a couple more questions for the audience. If you have questions that you want the panelists to answer, please drop them in the chat. And thank you once again for being here. And I'm going to turn it back over to Pam and our panelists.
So there's a question about from a filmmaker in the audience. In what ways can activist documentary filmmakers distribute their work without getting locked in exclusive contracts and paywalls or trapped in a festival circuit art world? In our case, our project will be available online and taken on a grassroots screening tour for public engagement. But we're also looking for non-exclusive streaming platforms and inclusive festivals for broader appeal. So I see Kelly nodding her head. Do you have some thoughts?
Well, I mean, New Day, I don't want to be so promotional, but New Day is a collective, and it's filmmaker owned and operated. And you know, we don't lock people into anything besides the educational market, which we share with Canopy, but that's quite specifically for, you know, selling to educational institutions and, you know, organizations that may use the film. You know, we're free to distribute through home video or, you know, video streaming at individual prices. I mean, you know, I've done that with all of my films after like a year or two on New Day. So I think it's after a year you can do that if you want to. So I think that, you know, we're super responsive to what filmmakers want to do, and most of us are really dedicated to trying to make some kind of change with the work. And so I think like having it be accessible is really important, but being able to figure out how to do that while, you know, also not just putting everything up on YouTube for everybody right away, because most of us rely on the income streams from our films to be able to make more films and to distribute the films that we're distributing. So, you know, there's lots of different ways to do that, but I would just put it on a plug for New Day there.
Yeah. And also that the co-op offers the opportunity to engage with a whole community of filmmakers who are interested in having their films have impact in both community and educational institutions. So it's not just an economic issue, but a structure, an infrastructure for getting our films out to both of those worlds, which is so important about New Day Films. And we do it collectively, cooperatively. Let's see if there are any other questions. Okay, so I'd like to know from each filmmaker on this esteemed panel, what's next for you?
Lisa, want to go?
What's next for me, or what's next for my film, or both?
Either or.
Yeah. So, well, in terms of, I have 3 films right now that I'm distributing, and then another one that I'm shooting. So I have a lot of pots on the stove, but I think probably Betty and Kelly can agree with this, that they're each like one of my children. So I don't want to neglect any of them. And in terms of Safe Haven, we're doing a tour in Canada this summer with the film. One thing I have to say for us about what's been really wonderful about this film is there are many people who participated in the film, that appear in the film and that are in the film. And the film was really well received by them. And that's really important to me as a filmmaker, that, you know, it's very important that they support the film. And I think it validates their stories and their actions. And so we want to just continue, you know, for them and for everyone, we want to continue this conversation that they bring up in the film. And so we're doing a tour this summer. The film is going to be at the AAG, the Association of American Geographers conference next month, which is a really large conference, which is both in Canada and in the US, Montreal and Denver, Colorado. And, you know, so we're just getting the film out there to lots of different educational institutions, and just really trying to generate conversation around this topic. That's really really important part of Canadian history, since so many war resistors went to Canada during Vietnam and really made a huge contribution to that country. But the younger generation doesn't know that much about it. So that's a goal to educate young Canadians. But then on this side of the border, you know, even Ken Burns, that made a film about, you know, over 17 hours about Vietnam, there's so little mention of what happened to these people who went to Canada. It's actually not in the series at all. So most Americans don't know that much about Canadians or US war resistors who went to Canada, who are now Canadian. And also almost no one knows that Iraq war resistors went during Iraq. So there's a lot of people and a lot of, you know, a lot of people to educate on this. And so we've got our work cut out for us. So that's just one of my films, but there's a lot to do.
Mm-hmm. Kelly and Betty?
Just looking forward to our Rabble Rousers premiere at DCTV, and working on a new movie, but we'll save that for another day. Thanks, everybody.
My project is my 10.5-month-old son. That's my big project right now in the world. But in all seriousness, I continue doing work with Chinatown Art Brigade. As folks probably know, there's this huge, big mega jail, one of 4 borough-based jails that the city is trying to build in New York City under sort of the premise of closing Rikers Island. Of course, Rikers needs to be closed. It's how many deaths so far? And we're just in February, 25 deaths so far. But the big one that's going to be the tallest in the world is supposed to be in Chinatown, actually next to DCTV, or like across the street from DCTV. And folks have been fighting the good fight. And so kind of getting Chinatown Art Brigade, trying to figure out, working as cultural workers, figuring out folks are doing amazing work already and getting the word out. But how do we make that connection more to abolition rather than a not in my backyard NIMBY kind of way of organizing, but more like, jails, more of an abolitionist approach to this prison industrial complex. And so there's that piece of what we're doing. And some of the exhibit that is at Pace University right now kind of speaks to that. And then my own personal work, like continuing to try to juggle interviewing. Part of my Unmasking Yellow Peril project is interviewing Asian Americans and actually incorporating their own family archives into just reshaping and retelling and reclaiming our own narrative, because our narrative is often invisible in the American narrative, or if our stories are told, they're often in a very stereotypical kind of portrayal of Chinese and Asian Americans. And so reclaiming that narrative, and so interviewing folks. And then the last thing is I have it's kind of a project I'm working with people who know more than me about this kind of stuff, but like trying to create a 360 VR experience with this short film that I made. And it's about Sunset Park. I know Kelly doesn't want to talk about her film about Sunset Park that she's making this huge production, but this is more of a speculative futures kind of short piece. Sunset Park is where I was born and raised, and so it's looking at it through the vantage point of my parents and what they're going through with a gentrification and displacement. And what if we were able to live in a world where there was an abundance of housing and that kind of thing. So it's like a weird, trippy, like an outlier, but something it's been a fun project for me. So I'm working with some people who know VR and know more than I do. And yeah, that's just the project on the side that I've been working on as well. So I would say that's it.
Great. That's so great. So we have one last question, and it's kind of a complex one. So I'll read it, and I'll encourage the person who posted it to maybe contact us through New Day Films for a deeper discussion. But he says, or they say, "Hi, this has been great. Here's an unusual issue with archives and archivists. We tried to develop an oral history project in collaboration with a university archive, following up with participants, many of whom had connections with the university. The archivist began insisting on a variety of shifting standards, such as the Smithsonian Oral History Metadata Guidelines, which would change as we agreed to them, in what amounted to gatekeeping, changes that ultimately blocked the project. Thoughts or suggestions on how documentarians can negotiate such standards and gatekeeping? Thanks." That's like a really granular kind of question, and one part of it is, I think, building relationships with archivists, and also I would recommend the group at American University, who has produced a lot of documents and guidelines around fair use and using archival material. The Center for Media and Social. Oh, Kelly, maybe you could say the full name. I'm forgetting. The name is escaping me right now, but it could be a great resource for that.
Center for Social Documentary.
Something like that. Someone might know and could put it in the chat. So great. I'm going to pass it back to Larissa. Thank you so much, everybody.
Well, we want to thank everyone for joining us today, and just had what a robust conversation, not just with our panelists, but also in our chat. And if you didn't get a chance to save the chat, we are going to highlight some of the links and resources that were shared and email that to you afterwards if you had registered through Eventbrite. We want to let you know that our next Reframe and Refresh will be in March, so stay tuned for that, and hope you will come back and join us. Look for information in your next email. And once again, if you want to get in contact with any of our filmmakers, you can do that through newday.com. You can go to their web pages or just email through the contact us section of the website. They're happy to answer any additional questions that we couldn't get to today. Thank you all so much for being here today, and we hope to see you next time at Reframe and Refresh. Bye, everyone.